Well, hello and welcome to the show. I'm Nadia Jordana, and you're watching It's a Woman's World. Our guest today, Linda Morrisson, is an incredible author, and she has just written a book titled Dear Heroin, a Memoir of Goodbyes. Let's go talk to Linda and learn more about the subjects encompassed within this book that include heroin abuse, drug abuse in general, and also suicide. Welcome to the show, ladies.
Hello. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And I'll introduce my co-host right away, Barbara Lavalure. Thank you for being on the show today.
Always an honor, Nadia, to be with esteemed colleagues and interviewers and to have such interesting authors and women to interview. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
And you always have such great questions. Ann McKenna, welcome to the show today.
Thank you for having me, Nadia. I'm looking forward to the discussion today.
You always have such thoughtful insights. I'm looking forward to that. And
Thank you.
Lynn Garthwaite.
Hi, Nadia. Thank you for having me as well. I'm looking forward to this topic. Very interesting and very important topic. So thanks for having me with you.
Yes, and our guest, Linda Morrisson, welcome to the show. You're an author, and you certainly have a gripping story and a backstory to the book you've just written and released. Would you, to kick things off, give us that backstory and give us a feel for the book?
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. Hi, ladies. So this is the story about my son, Michael, and our family's journey through his heroin addiction and then his death by suicide. It was a 4-year journey. He was 23 when he passed away. And I never really expected to be writing or anything about it. I would just be invited to talk and share the story. And people would just once in a while say, you should write about it. And I ended up doing that. But my goal has always been to share the story because there are so many people who have substance abuse disorders, people who die by suicide. And I want people to understand that addiction, drugs, and that even though I have the worst case scenario, you can still have a life after that, as they say in AA, happy, joyous, and free. And that's how I feel now, 10 years down the road.
Linda, we do have a few things in common. I've never met a dull nurse, I have to say, and I know that you were a nurse earlier in your career. And so I always feel immediately connected when I find someone is a nurse.
Mm-hmm.
I also have the unfortunate experience of having my father die by suicide when I was 12. So it's certainly impacted my life in ways that I would never know at the time. Of course, at that time, there was never anything in school for getting help with dealing with that back in the 50s. But I guess my question is, how did you really choose to write the book, having had some suggestions, but not necessarily being, a trained writer?
Well, I kept a journal for several months when Mike was going through his journey and when he passed away. And then I started taking classes at the Loft Literary Center in Minneapolis.
Smart.
And I took some memoir classes, and there was an instructor that her and I really connected. And so she helped me with my manuscript. as far as she could.
Terrific.
And I would just get on my computer and I would write different aspects of how I was feeling, or, how my obviously started his addiction, the different treatment centers he went to, moving away from home and then coming back, and then dying by suicide. So I just kept writing. I started in 2014 and my book came out last year, 2021. So it was a slow process for me, just because it can be real heavy writing, and I would just have to walk away for a while and get my bearings. But I just kept chipping away at it slowly, and then found a great publishing company, Wising, and they had great editors, and they really helped me really fine tune the book to different treatment centers from that way. Yeah, and as I wrote, I really was kind of sorting my feelings out, because he died in 2012. So I was just, 2 years into his death as I wrote. So for me, it was very cathartic to write, to get it on paper and to help me grieve, but help me to see the good things in his life and the good things in our lives too.
I guess coming from a chaplain, a counseling perspective, I'm just thinking, wow, I mean, you live with grief for the rest of your life. It never comes to an end. I do not have the experience of losing a child. My mother lost her son. He was 26. He also had alcohol addictions and all that. I guess my question is, when your son died, and first of all, sorry for your loss, because that's a lifetime loss.
It is. Thank you.
Yeah. When you found out about his death, what were your reactions and how did you deal with that?
Well, when I found out about his addiction, or his death, I was home. I was by myself. 2 policemen showed up at my door, and I knew kind of instinctively that this was about Mike. And obviously they told me that he had died. They gave me a few details that he had died at a local motel. There was drug paraphernalia in the room found, and a suicide note. Probably my first reaction was I was pretty numb and stunned by it. We knew at some point with an addiction, he could die from an overdose or getting some bad drugs. His drug of choice was heroin. But that he would take his own life, he was just at such a place, I think, with an internal pain. He just wanted that pain to stop. I believe he felt he was a disappointment to us, and he wasn't, not at all. We walked with him through this journey, but he was very disappointed in himself as well. So I think that from that part was how kind of I dealt with it. I was kind of numb. I had to call my husband because he was gone out of town, and I had to tell him over the phone. So that was really tough. And then I drove to see my other son who worked nearby. And I just remember as my husband got home and his Dan and we all embraced, we broke down. That's when we really sobbed about it. And then we had to go and drive to about 40 miles to our other son's job and tell him. And so that was tough. But we were all 4 together when, I knew, Alan knew, Dan knew, and then Sean knew. So we really clung to each other during that time.
Well, Linda, we really appreciate you, sharing this experience because it's going to help so many other people who read your book. There's no question about it. I had come across a kind of a fascinating statistic that I wanted to ask you about. It said that the standard relapse rate, if you can call it that, of people who go through treatment for different drug addictions is between 40 and 60%. But for heroin addiction, it's as high as 80% relapse. And I know you're not a psychologist, and I know you're not trained in that, but with the experience you've gone through, do you have any insight into why there's such a discrepancy, so much more there?
Well, I guess I can speak of Mike, but for him, the heroin, let me back up. He had a history of anxiety, which he'd had since he was a young man. And when he used heroin, it took his anxiety away. And he said he felt normal because he didn't know what it was like not to feel anxious. He felt normal when he didn't have the anxiety. And to be able to continue not having the anxiety, he would use. And if he was in situations where that produced a lot of anxiety, his cravings would kick in with that. And then he would end up using. He hated using, he didn't like using at all, but it also is obviously an addiction. But for him, it was feeling normal, that anxiety was gone for him, and that he could function in, social settings and, get work done and all those things that when he was anxious, he couldn't do. That paralyzed him. Does that answer your question?
Linda, when I was younger, way younger, I remember when heroin, before some of these other more modern drugs came onto the market, heroin was all the rage, so to speak. It was the big drug, but there was so much fear involved with it. And I won't say respect, but people feared it enough. Certainly when I was a young person, I feared it enough not to go near it, not to try for any reasons, whether offered or not.
Mhm.
And then other drugs came to the forefront, and heroin became ordinary. And actually, I remember some reports and some articles saying that it was so much less dangerous than cocaine. And as I recall, that's around the time that it started gaining a resurgence in use. What have you heard about that?
Well, I don't know. I know that it is an addictive drug. It's also hard for relapse and staying clean and sober. It's very hard. And it takes more for a heroin overdose or death than, say, fentanyl. I mean, fentanyl takes just a little grain of sand, and that can kill. And I agree, when I was in school, heroin, there were people I knew who did heroin, but those weren't the kind of people you hung around with back then. They were junkies, or they weren't from good families or whatever. Now, heroin affects so many people, and it could be your neighbor, it could be the person sitting next to you in the pew, it could be your banker, pastor, whatever. So it's gotten classic, probably isn't a good word, but more acceptable in that realm than when we grew up.
If I could interject something too, what I did a little research on, I understand that the resurgence of heroin use kind of happened with the opioid addiction problems, because opioids then were becoming expensive and hard to get. Heroin was much cheaper and easier to get, is what my understanding was, and it gave them some of the same results. And so that's what my understanding, the more recent resurgence of heroin use as a result of the opioid addictions.
Yeah, that's true too. Because Mike initially got relief when he had his wisdom teeth out. They gave him, I don't know, OxyContin or something. And that's when he kind of figured out his anxiety from that. He was also introduced to it through some friends around the same time frame. But yes, it is easier to get a hold of, and it's cheaper. And so I'm guessing that, again, like you were saying, that's another reason for the resurgence of it.
Unfortunately,
Sorry. I'm sorry. Plus, it's very addictive. So the dealers want to keep you coming back because they want you hooked on it too. So, and it's hard to get off. It really is. You really have to, let's say it's a daily battle.
Mhm. I was just going to say, unfortunately, I think that it's very, very common to know people. I have the experience of one of my nephew's sons who was just graduated from high school, and he died of an overdose because there was fentanyl in the drugs that he had taken, and he didn't know that. And you know, it's just beyond sad. But I understood you to say that you do give talks to various groups. Is that correct?
It is.
So when you're talking to groups, what kind of groups do you like to talk in front of or get in front of with your message? And what is the message you want to leave them with?
So, well, I've been to several treatment centers, and I've talked to the family members and also the clients who are in there. I've gone to churches and shared my story and Mike's journey with people from faith, because for me there is a component of faith in there. For me, I couldn't get through this journey without my faith in God. Some people call it higher power, God, whatever. So for me, that is a component of why I think I've been able to move forward a little easier, is because of the faith. I just this week, I spoke at a Memorial Day service at where my son's buried, and I kind of wove in the soldiers from war, and then those who were affected by drugs, kind of wove that together, because can be a lot of similarities. I did that. And then I spoke with a group and a youth group recently, and these were eighth grade to 12th graders. So that was the youngest group. I just spoke to them this week.
Wow.
And what I do is I just kind of I tell about Mike, what kind of a young man he was, a little bit about our family, and explain kind of how we ended up using heroin, and then just kind of briefly talk, because he had 8 treatment centers and he had some moves, and then of course when he died by suicide, and so I shared that, and then I just encourage them, if they know somebody that's had an experience like that, or they're thinking about drugs or whatever, because I feel like I'm the worst case scenario, because we lost Mike. There are other families who I'm happy, absolutely happy for them, that their child goes to treatment and gets clean and stays clean. And so there's the whole spectrum of how it can turn out for you. And so we didn't have the outcome with Mike that we had hoped for, even though he was in 8 different treatment centers and he worked really hard, but he just couldn't do it. But for our family, we've been able to come to terms with our loss, but also understand that Mike wouldn't want us to continue to grieve for him. He would want us to live our lives fully. And he mentioned that in his suicide note. And so that's what we try to do, live for him, but also live for us. And then just get the story out there so people understand that addiction is serious, and it's, death is the worst case scenario. And, walk alongside of families who are struggling with this. We didn't know anybody who had a child on drugs at that point. We didn't know very few people who've lost children to suicide. And so those who did rallied with us and walked beside us, and that was a great blessing.
I'm wondering what should people know, if just one or two things that people should know if someone they love, if they're fearful that they might be walking down that path?
Well, I think the biggest thing is to be honest and confront, and I mean in a compassionate way. Say, I'm seeing you're missing school. I see you're sleeping late. I see your friends have changed. You know, is there something going on? Are you using drugs? I think a real direct approach. We did that with Mike. The first time he lied to us and said, no, he was just, you know, not wanting to go to school or whatever. And that does happen because addiction can be very shaming and guilt producing. And he internally didn't want to feel that guilt and shame. So he did lie. And that was in about 9th grade. But then as he graduated high school and it progressed, there was no denying that. And so then we were able to confront him. He was absolutely said, yes, I'm using heroin and I don't know how to stop. And so that then was our journey to help him find ways getting to treatment to stop. But unfortunately, he wasn't totally able. He had two years of sobriety in that 4 years, which he did really well. He worked, he did AA and NA, and he really did work on his sobriety. But then again, anxiety, stressors in life then would cause him to go back. And then it would be a deep relapse. And each relapse was harder and longer for him and to get out of.
I do have one quick question. So, I mean, there's so many questions. It's a big subject, a wide, deep subject. But of the people who came around you, you mentioned shame, which is one thing that you hear all the time. This stigma, this shame, guilt feelings associated with it. You did have people, good-intended, well-intended people wanting to help. Just for people that are trying to help others' sake, were there things that were said, done around you that were not helpful? And what?
We did have a good group of people, even though they didn't know how to deal with it, that we didn't have any negative comments. But, you know, I have heard people, well, you should just stop. You know, he pull up his bootstrap and just do it every day, and not, you know, just stop. Don't do it anymore. And they don't understand the addiction piece. They don't understand how strong and compelling that is. And so those are the kinds of things, if you have a substance use disorder, you just can't stop. You need help. You need professional help. Mike even needed some psychological help because of his, you know, anxiety, and he ended up having a lot of depression, guilt, and shame with that. So yeah, it's and you know, for us, we just would kind of maybe ignore some of that, or not. Early on, when I would tell somebody how he died, they would just look at me and go, "Oh, I'm sorry," and then they would beat feet really quick. But I think sometimes it hits them close to home. Maybe they have kids that age, and that is something that maybe they struggle with wanting or not wanting to happen to them. And so, so those are some of the things that I think have affected me when I've told them, and people just kind of didn't understand. That was early on. Now I'm much better, and it's kind of like, if they don't get it, I understand that, and I don't take on the feelings from that.
Good.
Thanks.
And just real quickly, Linda, I know that there are probably other books that have been written out there by people who have had some experiences like this too, but it's so precious that you have added your voice to it too, because every story will be slightly different, and every person looking for some kind of help reading different books will get something different from each of them. And so your story being told is going to hit some people just square on, and they're going to feel comfort from it, probably get some help from it, maybe some new ideas that they hadn't tried, you know, with their loved one or whatever. So just know that your book being out there in the universe is a bright light for some people.
Thank you. I hope so. If I can help one person, one family with my story, then that makes it worth it, but it'll help.
Thanks.
The title is Dear Heroin, a Memoir of Goodbyes. Would you speak to that? That's how you came to the title.
Well, the Dear Heroin is from a letter that Mike wrote to Heroin, and he was breaking up with his drug of choice. That's how we got the Dear Heroin part. And then a Memoir of Goodbyes. The goodbyes are all, or not all, but some of the things in the book that we had to say goodbye to. Obviously, we had to say goodbye to Mike, but we also had to say goodbye to who we were as parents, as a mom, as a dad. Our lives changed, and our lives were turned upside down, and we had to say goodbye to a lot of who we were and who our family was, and what our family was like went from 5 to 4. So it is goodbyes, but then there are also hellos in, you know, coming out a little bit on the other side as a new, different, not new, but different, able to move forward. And even with this loss, continue with your life, because we have, you know, 2 other sons, and now we have 3 grandchildren that bring us a lot of joy. And, you know, of course, we wish Mike were here to enjoy that with them, but we know he's not. And I know he's in a better place. He's not struggling. He's not having all that anxiety that he was. And like I said before, he would not want us to continue to grieve for him. He would want us to move forward and live our lives to the very fullest.
Linda, we've run out of time. This has really been valuable. Thank you, Barbara, for asking that last question. That was so perfect to bring this to a close. And thank you also, Ann McKenna and Lynn Garthwaite. And back to Linda Morrisson. Thank you.